Okay, let's unpack this. In a world overflowing with information, where it's so easy to feel disconnected, maybe overwhelmed by just the sheer volume of everything happening around us, how do we find a compass, for our moral lives? How do we decide who or what truly deserves our care and attention, and how far does that care extend? Today, we're embarking on a philosophical journey, guided by an ancient map, Hierocles' Circles of Concern, that promises maybe redefine how we navigate our moral landscape. It's a powerful ancient framework that offers a profound shortcut to understanding our social duties and extending our empathy in ways that might just surprise you.
What's truly fascinating here is that, 2 millennia ago, a brilliant Stoic philosopher named Heracles provided us with an incredibly insightful yet beautifully simple model for grappling with this very challenge. He called it the circles of concern. And this isn't just some abstract idea to ponder in an ivory tower. It's a remarkably practical guide for how we relate to ourselves, our immediate families, our wider communities, and indeed all of humanity. It offers a foundational understanding for how we can actively construct our own ethical universe rather than, say, passively observing it.
And that's precisely our mission for this deep dive. We're going to thoroughly explore Hierocles' circles, delve into their profound implications, and discover how this ancient Stoic wisdom can empower you right here, right now, to live a more meaningful and connected life. We'll trace the roots of this idea, examine its incredibly practical applications, and crucially, understand how it connects to core Stoic principles like justice and tranquility. Because this isn't merely history. It's a living, breathing philosophy designed for concrete action and deep, authentic connection, especially when it comes to how we treat, well, every single person we encounter. Right. So to truly appreciate the maybe revolutionary nature of Hierocles' circles, we need to begin by setting the broader context. What exactly is Stoicism beyond a buzzword you might hear sometimes? And why does this philosophy, born in ancient Greece, continue to resonate so powerfully and inspire so many people today, thousands of years later?
Well, at its very core, Stoicism is best described not as some, esoteric academic pursuit, something you just study in a library for intellectual amusement, but as a deeply, deeply practical philosophy of life. Its entire purpose, right from its inception, was to be profoundly useful for living a meaningful, resilient, and, well, fulfilling existence. The ancient Stoics were quite insistent on this point. The primary reason to study Stoicism isn't just for theoretical knowledge or to impress your friends with obscure facts. It's so we can put it directly into practice, to cultivate a specific way of being in the world one day at a time. It's a philosophy for navigating the messy reality of human experience.
And its origins are quite interesting, aren't they? It wasn't always the Roman philosophy many people associated with, all toga-clad emperors and senators.
You're absolutely right. The journey of Stoicism actually began in Athens, the intellectual hub of the ancient world, around 300 BC. It was founded by Zeno of Citium, an intriguing figure who was originally from Cyprus. He famously lectured to his students at the Stoa Poikile, which translates to the painted porch or painted stoa, and, well, that's how the school eventually got its evocative name. His key successors, influential figures like Cleanthes and Chrysippus, meticulously developed and systematized these initial teachings, delving deeply into logic, physics, and ethics to create a comprehensive philosophical system. They truly laid the intellectual groundwork.
And that's where the Romans come in then. They seem to have taken this intricate Greek system and adapted it to their own specific needs and, well, very practical interests.
Exactly. As the philosophy migrated west and found fertile ground in Rome, it underwent a distinct evolution. Later Roman Stoics, individuals whose names are now synonymous with the philosophy, think of Seneca, the eloquent statesman and playwright Epictetus, the former slave turned revered teacher, and even the emperor Marcus Aurelius himself showed a notable shift in focus. They were far less interested in the intricate logical puzzles and the detailed cosmological physics that the Greek Stoics had spent so much time on. In fact, by Marcus Aurelius's time, these more theoretical subjects were often considered secondary, if not largely abandoned. He even, quite famously, congratulated himself in his meditations for not having wasted his precious time on them. The Roman adaptation sort of streamlined the philosophy, making it even more directly applicable to ethical living and the challenges of leadership in daily life.
So if they moved away from those deep dives into logic and physics, what did they emphasize instead? What became their primary focus?
Well, the primary ethical goal for the Greek Stoics, at its purest, was virtue, the unwavering pursuit of moral excellence for its own sake. The Romans certainly retained this fundamental commitment to virtue, seeing it as the highest good, but they also repeatedly advanced a second equally important goal, one that perhaps resonated more deeply with the turbulent Roman world, the attainment of tranquility. Now, this wasn't some sort of emotionally numb, zombie-like state, as is often mistakenly portrayed. Rather, Stoic tranquility was understood as a profound, robust psychological state marked by the absence of disruptive, negative emotions like grief, anger, and anxiety. And crucially, it also implied the presence of positive emotions, such as a deep, abiding joy, an inner lightness, and a settled peace. It was about achieving an unperturbed inner calm that allowed for clear, rational thought and decisive action, even amidst chaos. The true insight of Stoic tranquility isn't just avoiding negative emotions, it's recognizing that by doing so, you unlock a profound mental clarity. Imagine the decisions you could make, the relationships you could nurture if your actions weren't constantly muddied by anger, anxiety, or grief. That's the powerful, actionable freedom Stoicism promises.
That's a powerful distinction. And what's fascinating here is how this emphasis on practical living and tranquility directly connects to the ultimate aim of all ancient Greek philosophy, happiness or eudaimonia.
Indeed. For the Stoics, eudaimonia wasn't about fleeting pleasure or merely feeling good in a superficial sense. It was about living well, about a deep, sustained flourishing, or as some translate it, the fulfillment of all desires that align with reason and nature. Now, here's a striking contrast with, say, Aristotle. For the Stoics, moral goodness was the sole constituent of happiness. This was a radical claim. It meant they boldly asserted that happiness was always entirely within one's power, regardless of external circumstances. This directly challenged the Aristotelian idea that happiness also required some measure of good fortune, like health, wealth, or good friends. Zeno himself, the founder, defined happiness as a good flow of life, and Seneca beautifully elaborated on it as peacefulness and constant tranquility. It's important to clarify, though, that this isn't a Kantian doing what is right because it is right in isolation, without any ultimate aim. Stoicism retains a clear teleological or goal-oriented and eudaimonistic or happiness-focused framework. The reason you act virtuously is ultimately for your own eudaimonia, though that happiness is profoundly defined by virtue itself.
And a truly crucial prerequisite for even beginning to pursue this kind of happiness, and indeed for living a Stoic life, is understanding what's famously called the Stoic dichotomy of control. This seems like the foundational cornerstone.
It absolutely is the bedrock of Stoic practice. Epictetus, the former slave who became a profound Stoic teacher, put it most famously and succinctly: some things are up to us and others are not. This distinction is absolutely foundational, and while we often think of it as a simple binary, it's really a more nuanced recognition of three levels of influence we have over the world and our lives.
The three levels. That's a helpful clarification. Could you walk us through those, perhaps with an example that really hits home for us today?
Of course. The first level is what's under our direct control. This includes our choices, our goals, our desires, our aversions, and the means we select to achieve those goals. For instance, choosing to undertake a new project at work or diligently studying for an exam. Epictetus emphasizes that we are given what is intrinsically our own, our will, our judgments, our inner disposition free from hindrance. Things like our fidelity, our virtuous shame, our constancy, our opinions, our impulses are inherently ours to cultivate and maintain. No one can truly take these from us unless we willingly surrender them. This is your inner citadel, your inviolable core.
So our internal world, essentially, and our direct mental actions, our choices, our judgments.
Precisely. The second level encompasses things over which we have partial influence. These are things we choose to do, we commit to, but whose full and perfect implementation we cannot completely guarantee due to external factors. Imagine you're choosing to start a business. You make the choice. You put in the hours. You build the product. You strategize marketing. You're influencing every step. But external factors, the market shifts, a key supplier goes out of business, a new competitor emerges, can still impact the final outcome. We can influence them profoundly, but we don't control the outcome outright. Or consider trying to persuade a friend. You can choose your words carefully, appeal to reason, present your arguments compellingly, that's within your direct control. But whether they are persuaded, that's partially influenced, but ultimately up to them.
Right. You can lead a horse to water. And the third level sounds like it's completely out of our hands, the ultimate test of acceptance.
Correct. The third level consists of factors over which we have no control whatsoever. These are things entirely out of our influence. Think of the weather on the day of an important outdoor event, or a global pandemic, or, I don't know, the decisions made by politicians completely outside your voting district. There's nothing we can do to change them directly. The Stoics teach that understanding these distinctions is absolutely paramount because the pitfall of misplaced desire is a major, major source of unhappiness. If you spend your precious mental and emotional energy desiring what is not ultimately ultimately your own external things like wealth, reputation, even the health of your loved ones in an ultimate absolute sense, you inevitably risk losing what is your own. Your inner freedom, your tranquility, and your peace of mind. You effectively hand your happiness over to fate, making yourself vulnerable to disappointment and perturbation. For example, if you lose your job, the Stoic wouldn't say, "Don't be sad." Instead, they'd focus on, your reaction to losing the job is within your control. Your skills, your effort to find a new one, those are yours. The company's decision, the market conditions, those are not. Don't waste energy on what's not yours.
So the philosopher's work then is to deeply align themselves with this reality, to internalize this distinction and live by it, almost like retraining your instincts.
Exactly. The work of a philosopher, as Epictetus put it, is to adapt one's wishes to what is actually happening in the world. The ultimate goal is that nothing happens contrary to our wish, and that nothing we wish for fails to happen, because our wishes are aligned with reality. This leads to a life without uneasiness, fear, or perturbation. And crucially, this inner alignment allows you to maintain all your natural and acquired relations as a son, father, a citizen, a spouse, a neighbor, consistently with reason and without being thrown off balance by external events. It's about securing your inner fortress so you can engage with the world from a place of strength, calm, and clarity, rather than being tossed about by every external wind.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Once we understand what's truly in our control, our judgments, our will, our inner state, the next big question for the Stoics becomes, how do we extend our circle of concern beyond ourselves? What do you do with that unshakable inner fortress? How do you then look outward and apply that controlled, rational intention to our relationships and our duties to others, especially in a world that often feels, well, fractured?
This is precisely where Hierocles' circles of concern, a truly core Stoic concept, comes into play, offering an incredibly powerful and practical model for understanding social duty and empathy. Hierocles outlined what he called a series of concentric circles around the individual, gradually expanding in scope. The doctrine itself is explicitly referred to as Hierocles' widening, or to be precise, contracting circles of concern. Now, this seemingly paradoxical description highlights the active, almost revolutionary nature of the Stoic practice. At its heart, the concept begins with oikiosis, not just self-love, but this fundamental instinctual affinity for what is one's own. Think of that deep, visceral pull a parent feels to protect their child. That's oikiosis in its rawest, most immediate form. The Stoic genius was to then ask, how do we consciously, rationally extend that same powerful sense of affinity outwards beyond our initial instinct?
So let's start with that innermost circle. What does it contain and why is it the starting point? Seems obvious, maybe, but foundational.
The innermost circle begins, quite naturally, with self-love and self-preservation. The Stoics observed that humans, and indeed all animals, are driven by a natural, instinctual impulse to love themselves and to prefer what preserves their integrity and well-being. This is how appropriate actions are first revealed to our natural instinct, things that keep us safe, healthy, and thriving. It's a primal, unthinking response. For example, when you see a child fall and immediately reach out to catch them, or when you feel a pang of concern for your own safety in a dangerous situation, that's the very first, deeply ingrained natural reaction, a father's natural reaction to his daughter's pain, right? This self-affinity, this oikiosis, is the foundational building block for all other affections and duties. Without a stable, self-preserving core, expanding concern becomes, well, unsustainable.
And from that core, for that deep-seated self-affinity, the circles begin to expand outward, logically, like ripples in a pond.
Precisely. From the individual's mind or self, these circles of affection and duty gradually expand like ripples in a pond. The next circle, moving immediately outward, naturally encompasses your immediate family, your parents, your children, your spouse, and your siblings. The Stoics emphasize that it is entirely natural for parents to love their children and for family members to feel a bond. They saw community life in its most fundamental sense as a direct and natural consequence of this deeply rooted instinctual family love. It's the first extension of that oikiosis.
Okay, self, then immediate family, and then it keeps going, building on these layers of connection.
Yes, the circles continue to expand. Beyond immediate family, the next layer includes your extended family and your neighbors, then your wider circle of friends and your local community. As these circles grow, the sense of belonging and responsibility naturally deepens and widens. You start to feel a responsibility for the well-being of those around you, not just those sharing your immediate bloodline. The next layer out is your fellow citizens or countrymen, those who share a common culture, language, or state. For the Stoics, engaging in political activities, serving one's country, and contributing to the common good were not optional extras. They were considered appropriate functions, or kathekanta, inherent to human nature. It was an active civic duty to participate in the polis.
And the final broadest and most encompassing circle. This sounds like the ultimate test of this framework,
Yeah.
a really challenging one.
That outermost circle embraces all humanity. It encompasses all rational beings, regardless of their origin, their social status, their nationality, or their background. The Stoics believed that humans are uniquely equipped with reason to understand the cosmic principle governing the world, the logos, and this understanding naturally makes us social animals and indeed world citizens. Our individual nature is fundamentally a part of cosmic nature, making us interconnected parts of a greater whole. This profound perspective has direct and inescapable ethical repercussions, underscoring our moral demands by placing them in a universal setting. Every single person in this view is a fellow citizen of the cosmos and thus deserving of our consideration.
So it sounds like this isn't just about passively acknowledging these circles or feeling a vague sense of connection, but actively, relentlessly working with them. You mentioned contracting earlier, which seems counterintuitive for expanding concern. Can you elaborate on that active practice? What does that mean, contracting?
That's the crucial and perhaps most challenging Stoic practice. The goal of a Stoic is to constantly and consciously work on pulling these outer circles inward, rather than letting the inner ones expand disproportionately or become selfish. It means deliberately and systematically reducing the perceived distance between your self-interest and the welfare of others. Hierocles describes it vividly. We must, by analogy, mentally draw the circles together, pushing them towards the center until our concern for a stranger is as immediate as our concern for a distant relative, and then our concern for that distant relative as immediate as for a close friend, and so on, until the circles effectively emerge and all humanity becomes, in a sense, family. This is not about diminishing your love for your immediate family. It's about expanding your love and concern for humanity to match that intensity. The real insight here isn't just that we should care for all humanity, but how deeply counterintuitive and challenging this is to our evolved, often tribal human nature. Hierocles isn't asking for passive empathy, but for an active, almost revolutionary discipline to bridge the gap between us and them on a daily basis. It's about fighting the default settings of our own minds.
Wow. So it's not just about what we feel naturally, those initial gut reactions, but how our reason guides us to consciously expand that natural affinity. It's about a relentless, active effort to embody what the Stoics call social virtue. It's work.
Absolutely. The Stoics recognize that we begin life with instinctual behaviors, some of which are quite selfish, driven purely by self-preservation. But with the age of reason, typically around mid-childhood, we begin to reflect critically on our actions and our motivations. This allows us to separate what is merely natural, a spontaneous impulse, from what is truly right or good, a choice guided by virtue. Sometimes this means overriding those more selfish natural impulses. This isn't cold reason taking over our emotions, as is often misunderstood in modern interpretations. Instead, it's a more profound, expansive understanding that informs and guides our affections, making them more rational, more consistent, and ultimately more inclusive. As our understanding develops and we grasp the conception or noia of coherent and virtuous conduct, we come to value this harmony of conduct, this rational, consistent, and expansive empathy, even higher than our initial spontaneous affections. This cultivated harmony, where reason guides our expanded empathy, actually constitutes the highest human good, desirable for its own sake. It is through this active, rational cultivation of oikiosis that we truly live in accordance with nature and achieve justice in its broadest sense.
This sounds like an incredibly demanding and frankly noble framework. The idea of deliberately pulling those outer circles inward, challenging our natural inclinations, it's huge. How then does this ethical vision translate into real-world behavior and specific Stoic practices that you, our listener, can actually apply in your daily life?
It's definitely an act of philosophy demanding conscious effort. The Stoics had very practical advice for living this out. First, they recommend a kind of preparation for social interaction. This means, quite literally, preparing for our dealings with other people before the actual interaction happens. Epictetus, for example, advises us to form a certain character and pattern for ourselves when we are alone, reflecting on our values and how we want to behave. Then, the challenge is to remain true to that character, that internal standard, when we are with others, regardless of their behavior. This premeditation helps ensure consistency in our moral conduct, ensuring we act from our principles rather than being swept away by external provocations or, peer pressure.
So essentially, you decide who you want to be, and then you consciously stick to it. like setting an intention before you walk into a meeting or a difficult conversation. But what about choosing the people you spend your precious time with? Is the Stoic truly indiscriminate in their associations? Or can you be selective?
That's an important and very practical distinction. The Stoics believed we cannot be selective in doing our fundamental social duty. There will inevitably be times when we must associate with annoying, misguided, or even malicious people in order to work for common interests, whether that's in civic life, in your workplace, or within your community. Our duty to the larger community, that outermost circle, often demands this engagement, even with challenging individuals. We can't just opt out of society. However, we can and should be selective about whom we befriend. The Stoics strongly recommend avoiding people whose values are corrupted, lest their negative outlook or habits contaminate our own virtuous aspirations. Instead, you should actively seek out friends who share proper Stoic values, especially those who are doing a better job of living in accordance with them. Learn from them, be inspired by them. Friendships, true friendships, are chosen alliances that support your growth. Social duties are often given and must be honored.
That's a very practical line to draw. Duty versus chosen friendship. And what about Stoic justice and engaging in public life? It's often criticized as being too focused on the individual's inner world, almost withdrawing from society. But the circles of concern suggest a very outward-looking, socially responsible role. How does that tension resolve?
That criticism is largely misplaced, especially when you look at the historical figures of Stoicism. Sources emphasize the relentlessly active nature of the Stoic moral agent. Far from withdrawing, both the wise and those making progress toward virtue are constantly applying practical wisdom to a succession of endeavors, whether they are personal, political, or social. It's about controlling how those endeavors are expressed in our attention, our imagination, our intention, our deliberation, our emotion, and our conduct. This active engagement is central and highlights the profound political and social dimension of Stoic ethics. The inner citadel isn't a retreat from the world, but a fortress for engaging with it more effectively and virtuously. It gives you the stability to act.
And within that active engagement, there's a distinction that often comes up in Stoic texts between what they call proper functions and right actions. Yeah. Could you elaborate on that? Because it seems crucial for understanding their standard of justice. Like, what's the difference?
Certainly. This distinction highlights the depth of Stoic ethical demands. A proper function, katheukanta, is an intermediate action that is natural and has value. For example, returning a deposit, getting married, taking care of your parents, or engaging in politics. These are actions that are generally appropriate given our human nature and social roles. Things a reasonable person would do. They're proper. A right action, katarthamata, however, is a perfect proper function performed in the just manner. This means that only the wise man, the Stoic sage, can truly perform a right action because it's not just what is done, but crucially how and why it's done. With perfect virtuous intention, complete reason, and unwavering moral purity, the intention and the moral execution elevate a mere proper function to a right action. The crucial part is understanding that doing a proper function like returning a lost wallet isn't enough for the Stoic sage. Many people return wallets, but the right action, karathamata, comes from why you return it, with perfect virtuous intention, not for praise, not out of fear, but because it is the perfectly rational and just thing to do. It highlights how Stoicism critiques mere conformity to rules, demanding inner alignment with virtue.
So, the ideal Stoic sage embodies justice at its highest, most perfect level. It's about the inner state matching the outer action flawlessly.
Precisely. The Stoic wise man is described as being dyed deep with justice. He naturally cares for all rational beings as though they were his brothers and sisters, because he understands their shared humanity and their common citizenship in the cosmos. This isn't just a theoretical ideal. We actually see powerful historical examples of Stoics attempting to live out this expansive justice, even when it demanded extraordinary courage and self-mastery.
And these examples truly bring the philosophy to life, don't they? Let's look at a few of them, starting with Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor. His clemency after the revolt of Avidius Cassius is quite famous, and it's a brilliant illustration of these circles in action.
It's one of the most powerful demonstrations of Stoic justice and expanding concern in action. The context was dire. Avidius Cassius, one of Marcus's most trusted generals, declared himself emperor in Syria. This was a direct existential threat to the stability of the Roman Empire and to Marcus's own reign. The usual response in such circumstances would have been swift, brutal suppression and widespread purges of Cassius's family and supporters. But Marcus Aurelius's conduct demonstrated the greatness of his soul and his deep commitment to his Stoic principles. Imagine the pressure on an emperor after a rebellion. The natural, almost expected response would be brutal suppression, a clear message. But Marcus, deeply steeped in Stoicism, chose a path of radical clemency. He wasn't just being nice, he was actively practicing that innermost circle of control over his own anger and desire for revenge, and then deliberately pulling the outermost circle of all humanity inward, seeing his enemies' families as fellow rational beings deserving of justice and protection. Despite Cassius's clear ambition and the threat he posed, Marcus showed exceptional mercy. He pardoned Cassius's family and his allies, he pleaded with the Senate for no further punishments, allowed exiles to return, and even ordered protection for Cassius's wife and children, ensuring they lived freely and received a fair share of his wealth. Marcus explicitly stated he wished to be able to say that only those slain during the rebellion had died as a result of it. This is a profound, almost revolutionary example of pulling that all humanity circle inward, extending care, justice, and compassion even to those who were his direct adversaries and threatened his life and empire. It speaks volumes about the depth of his character, molded by Stoicism.
That's a truly remarkable display of restraint and compassion in a time of intense political instability. Just wow. But not all Stoic figures were quite so conciliatory, shall we say. Cato the Younger, for instance, was known for his almost inflexible rigor and idealism. He presents a different side of Stoic justice, doesn't he? Kind of the opposite approach, almost.
Cato the Younger was indeed a fascinating and complex figure, a paragon of civic virtue, but also a figure of immense controversy in his own time. He was known for his unflinching idealism and his almost legendary obstinacy, embodying a rigid interpretation of Stoic principles that led him to live by the motto, "No better friend, no worse enemy." While he was certainly a beacon of political integrity, refusing bribes and standing firm against corruption, his uncompromising stance could also be politically challenging. For example, he rejected an alliance with Pompey that many, including Cicero, believed could have saved the Roman Republic from Caesar's rising power. Cicero, while respecting Cato immensely for his moral purity, found his rigidity problematic, arguing that it sometimes put the government at risk by failing to adapt to political realities. This highlights the practical challenge of applying Stoic principles in extremely complex political landscapes, especially the tension between absolute rectitude and pragmatic necessity. It raises the question, can justice be too pure to be effective? Or maybe, when does principle become detrimental stubbornness?
So, even with the best intentions, applying these ideals isn't always straightforward. There can be unintended consequences. Are there examples of extending concern and forgiveness in more personal yet equally profound ways, perhaps in the face of extreme personal injustice? Less political, more human.
Absolutely. Consider the story of Phocion, the Athenian general, and an admirable figure of Stoic composure. He was unjustly condemned to death by his own countrymen, a truly devastating personal betrayal. Yet in his final moments, as he was about to drink the hemlock, he turned to his son and told him to cherish no resentment against the Athenians. This is an extraordinary example of extending concern and forgiveness, not just to a distant humanity, but to the very people who are unjustly taking his life, even in the face of extreme personal adversity and injustice. It's a powerful statement of choosing one's internal response, even when facing death, and refusing to let anger or bitterness define one's legacy or influence one's loved ones. It embodies the ultimate control over one's inner world, even when all external control has been stripped away.
These aren't just fascinating historical stories. They're blueprints, aren't they? They show us how this philosophy calls for a very active, engaged, and empathetic approach to life, even when it's incredibly difficult. It emphasizes that justice isn't just a legal concept or a societal rule, but a deeply personal, active virtue that demands courage, reason, and a conscious extension of our innermost affections. So how do we integrate these expansive ideas, from the foundational dichotomy of control to Hierocles' revolutionary circles of concern, and then those challenging practical examples of Stoic justice into our daily existence? It's about more than just action, isn't it? It feels like it's about shifting our fundamental perception of the world itself, how we see our place within it.
This is where the broader philosophical underpinnings and the practical psychological techniques for cultivating this ethical outlook truly come into play. A key aspect, one that underpins the outward expansion of the circles, is developing what Stoics called cosmic consciousness and embracing the profound idea of world citizenship.
Cosmic consciousness sounds quite grand, almost mystical. What precisely does that entail for a Stoic? Is it like meditation or?
It's about cultivating an unwavering awareness of being an integral, interconnected part of the larger cosmos. This leads to what they described as a dilation of ourself throughout the infinity of universal nature. Marcus Aurelius, in his own Meditations, beautifully observed that the rational soul travels through the whole universe and the void that surrounds it. It reaches out into the boundless extent of infinity, and it examines and contemplates the periodic rebirth of all things. This expansive, almost dizzying perspective helps to profoundly diminish the perceived importance of our transient, often petty personal troubles, and places our individual actions within a universal, eternal context. It's a profound, humbling, and an empowering enlargement of perspective simultaneously. Seeing the big picture, really.
And how does that cosmic perspective then connect to being a world citizen, a cosmopolite? That sounds very modern, actually.
Both Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius insisted on this idea, making it a cornerstone of their ethical framework. They believed our individual natures are not isolated, but are fundamentally part of cosmic nature itself, making us parts of a greater whole. This isn't just poetic language, it has direct and inescapable ethical repercussions. By understanding ourselves as citizens of the entire cosmos, we underscore our moral demands by placing them in a universal setting. It means that your fellow human being, no matter where they are from, is not just a stranger, but a fellow citizen in this grand universal city. This provides an almost inescapable mandate for justice and compassion. It's almost astonishing how forward-thinking this idea of world citizenship was, isn't it? For someone like Epictetus, a former slave, to conceptualize himself as a citizen of the entire cosmos would have been a truly radical and liberating thought.
Yeah, absolutely. This sounds like it touches deeply on their understanding of a higher power or a guiding force, too. The logos you mentioned.
It absolutely does. The Stoics were pantheists. They conceived of the universe not as a random collection of matter, but as a living organism, endowed with perfect reason, which they called the logos, and they often referred to this universe as God. This conception of God implies a kind of benevolent providence, with rules or principles akin to the immutable laws of nature. It's important to note that modern Stoics today have flexibility in interpreting this. Some retain the original pantheistic meaning, others interpret it in monotheistic terms, and many read it in a completely secular fashion, focusing on the rational, ordered laws of nature without religious connotations. The core idea is an ordered, rational universe you align with.
So for them, obedience to this God or to nature was critical to living well, accepting the flow.
Precisely. Epictetus's recommendations, for instance, are deeply grounded in a providential theology. For him, it is a profound error, a fundamental misunderstanding of reality, to attribute badness or evil to anything for which human beings are not directly responsible. Emotional health, in this view, comes from a deep and unwavering confidence in the divine rationale of all outcomes. He advises attaching your desires to Zeus and the other gods, or to the rational order of the universe, effectively handing them over, letting them take charge of what is not in your control. This radical detachment from outcomes beyond your control is absolutely key to achieving and maintaining Stoic tranquility.
Okay, so beyond this grand cosmic perspective, what are some of the more individual daily practices for cultivating this ethical outlook and maintaining that inner tranquility, things people can actually do?
A vital technique is cultivating what Marcus Aurelius famously called the inner citadel through consistent self-reflection. This involves regularly retreating within yourself, even for a few minutes, to find comfort, apply Stoic maxims, and regain your composure. This inner citadel provides a secure, inviolable base, a sanctuary in difficult situations, a place where externals cannot touch your core. It's a mental space you build and fortify through practice, like finding your calm center.
Marcus Aurelius himself, the emperor, was known for a specific daily practice along these lines, wasn't he? Something we could all benefit from, maybe even tonight.
Indeed. Marcus Aurelius was a strong advocate for an evening meditation. At the end of each day, he recommended reviewing how well one acted in accordance with values and virtues. It's not about wallowing in self-pity or regret, but a clinical, objective review. You reflect on your desires, what you did well, what you did poorly, or what you could do differently tomorrow. It's helpful to imagine presenting this review to a wise Stoic mentor or even a panel of sages, considering what advice they might offer. Think about that argument you had at work, or a decision you regret. The evening meditation isn't about beating yourself up, but clinically reviewing. What was my initial impulse? Was it aligned with virtue? What Stoic principle could I have applied? How will I approach a similar situation tomorrow? It's a powerful feedback loop for ethical growth and continuous improvement.
That's a practical way to assess progress and plan for the future, sort of like a daily moral inventory. But what about managing those immediate, often overwhelming emotional reactions like anger that seem to erupt without warning, the ones that hijack you?
For managing powerful emotions like anger, the Stoic practice of monitoring impressions, Catching and countering them is absolutely crucial. Seneca, in particular, offered a brilliant three-phase analysis of anger. The first phase is a pre-reflective, involuntary bodily reaction, a tightening in the chest, a flush of heat, the physical stuff. The second is a cognitive phase, where you consciously reflect on what's happening, recognize it as anger, and begin to judge its cause. That person did that to me. The second phase, Seneca argues, is your critical window to act. The third phase is when you've already given full assent to the anger and it's effectively too late to control it. The emotion has taken over. The goal, then, is to intervene in that cognitive phase before the anger takes hold, by questioning the impression and choosing a rational response. It's about pausing and redirecting that initial judgment before it dictates your action, finding that gap between stimulus and response.
It's about catching it early, building that awareness muscle. And what about when adversity strikes, which it inevitably will? How does Stoicism equip us for those unavoidable hardships? Bad stuff happens.
This is where Stoicism truly shines, and why it's described as the school with the most explicitly therapeutic orientation and a large, incredibly effective toolbox of psychological techniques. A primary strategy is turning adversity to advantage. The Stoics believed you absolutely cannot choose what happens to you in life, but you always get to choose how to react to it, how to interpret it, and what you make of it. A setback or a misfortune can be interpreted constructively as a chance to prove oneself, to learn a valuable lesson, to build resilience, or to find a new path. It becomes an opportunity disguised as an obstacle. The obstacle is the way, as they say.
And are there any specific techniques for dealing with challenges like physical pain or illness, which feels so utterly beyond our control that seems really tough?
For physical pain or illness, they advocated cognitive distancing. This means actively separating your mind, your rational faculty, from the physical sensation. You remind yourself that it is not things or sensations that upset us, but our judgments about them. You can observe the pain without letting it define your inner state or peace. The pain is there, but your judgment about its terribleness is within your control. You cultivate a detached observer within yourself. It's not denying the pain, but reframing your relationship to it.
And what about preparing for future difficulties, perhaps to lessen their emotional impact when they do inevitably arrive? Planning ahead for trouble.
That's where anticipation, or premeditatio malorum, comes in the premeditation of evils. This is the deliberate practice of preparing for potential setbacks by consciously considering how things might go wrong. This premeditation of catastrophe, or a kind of in vitro exposure to potential problems, allows anxiety to abate naturally when the feared event occurs, or at least significantly reduces its shock value. By mentally rehearsing difficult scenarios, like losing a job, or facing criticism, or experiencing illness, you build mental resilience. When the obstacle appears, it's not a surprise. You've already thought about it, processed some of the initial emotional shock, and can approach it from a more reasoned position, helping to turn it into an opportunity for growth.
So embracing what might be rather than dreading it. That sounds incredibly liberating, actually. Less fear, maybe.
Exactly. And a crucial part of that is acceptance of fate amor fati, loving your fate. Coming to terms with unpleasant events once they have happened often means accepting their inevitability as part of the rational order of the cosmos. The Stoics would say, nature gives all and takes all back. Bemoaning things that had to happen or wishing things were otherwise is pointless, irrational, and only generates further distress and perturbation. True freedom and tranquility for the Stoics come from aligning your will with what is, with the universe's flow, rather than fighting against it.
And finally, the Stoics even found immense value in contemplating something most people instinctively shy away from, often with great fear: mortality itself, death.
Contemplating one's own death, for the Stoics, is not about longing for it or dwelling morbidly. On the contrary, it's about getting the absolute most out of life right here, right now. Understanding that your days are fundamentally numbered, that life is finite, prevents you from squandering your precious time. They advise living each day as if it were your last, not to hasten death, but to extract the full value of that day, to live it fully, virtuously, and with purpose. Memento mori. Epictetus, ever blunt, famously said, "You are a fool to want your children, wife, or friends to be immortal. It calls for powers beyond you, and gifts not yours to either own or give." Death is not inherently terrible. It is only our judgment that makes it so. By confronting this ultimate reality, we can strip it of its power to cause fear, freeing us to live more fully and appreciatively in the present moment, dedicated to what truly matters. Hashtag outro. So, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Hierocles' Circles of Concern isn't merely a fascinating historical curiosity or some abstract ethical model for philosophers. It's a profoundly actionable framework, a living practice, urging you to consciously expand your capacity for empathy and social duty. It challenges you to look beyond immediate self interest and cultivate a profound, active sense of interconnectedness with every living being, recognizing their inherent worth as fellow rational beings in the cosmos. It's a powerful call to move from passive awareness to active, inclusive care, transforming not just your outlook, but your actions. It's about doing the work.
Yeah, it's about understanding deeply and viscerally that your personal well-being is inextricably linked to the well-being of your family, your community, and even those you may never meet across the globe. The Stoics show us that true freedom and lasting tranquility aren't found in isolation or in a narrow, selfish focus on the self. Instead, they are found in actively living as a citizen of the world, engaging with its challenges, and extending justice and compassion wherever you can, pulling those circles ever inward. So, what does this all mean for you? As you reflect on the circles of concern and the Stoic call to action, maybe consider this final provocative thought for your own exploration.
How might actively and intentionally pulling inward your outer circles, consistently extending care, justice, and compassion to those furthest from your immediate experience, not only transform your personal sense of purpose and inner peace, but also empower you to reshape the world around you, one thoughtful, empathetic, and courageous action at a time?